This video is going to be on a subject that I've been thinking of off and on for a little while here. And that's what should a post-conflict or post-Civil War military look like in the United States or potentially another country. Now, there still would need to be a military. I know some people advocate going to 100% just the Swiss model, but you still have to protect your coastlines. You still got to protect your borders. You still got to protect your airspace. So that means there would need to be some type of military set up. Now, basically what I've thought of is kind of the three-tiered level. The bulk of the force would be your militia, your volunteers. Each unit would determine what type of unit they would be and how they should be equipped. But they should get some type of guidance from the state level, and I'll explain why. Above that, you will have your State Guard, which would be made up of what used to be at that time known as the National Guard and Reserve Forces. They would just be referred to as a State Guard, and they would fall under the governor. They would only be in that state or in that region of the United States. They would not deploy overseas like happens now. They would be part-timers. They would have their one weekend a month, and also 1 month a year they would have a rotation on the border. And during that rotation would be when they would do their training, their qualifications and stuff. So also, now at the top, the smallest part would be the Department of Defense, and it would be an actual Department of Defense. Their mission is defense of the homeland, defense of the country's soil. And that would be your active troops. And they would be the ones running the national level arsenals, storage sites, meaning for aircraft, ships, and bulk ammunition and that stuff. They would also be the ones that would run the training bases. They would also be the ones to run the anti-ballistic missile sites, along with the intercontinental ballistic sites, the ICBMs, and potentially any SAM sites that are set up around major cities. Now, as I said, the primary mission is defense of the country. It is not nation building overseas. It is not empire building. It is not going overseas to take out someone just because we don't like them. It is for defense of this country, and that should be laid out very clearly in the law. The military should maintain a long-range strike capability for deterrence and also retaliatory strikes. And that long-range capability would be your ICBMs, your long-range heavy bombers, such as your B-52s and your B-2s. They would also have, or should maintain, some aircraft carriers, subs, troop ships, landing ships, and so forth. Now, the only restriction I can think of on the militia is they should have no weapons of mass destruction capability. That should only be up at the active level, the Department of Defense, just like now. There's really no reason a militia needs chemical weapons or biological or nuclear or radiological, but they should be able to get anything else that they need. There really shouldn't be any restrictions on that. Now, some notes that I wrote up here. This is going to be a longer video. The militia, which is the bulk of the force, will be primarily light infantry, but there will be some units that will be armored. They'll have tanks. Some that would be motorized units, and they could be in trucks or captured wheeled armored personnel carriers such as Russian BTRs, maybe French VABs, or some other captured foreign APC. There should be some light artillery units, and they should have somewhat of a limitation, probably not above 122 millimeter, and even multiple launch rocket systems not above the 122 millimeter or 107 millimeter. And they should also have air defense capabilities, or air defense units, which would be equipped with your AAA, your automatic anti-aircraft cannons or guns, and also man-portable air defense systems. Now, most of the large caliber ammunition, such as the rockets, the artillery ammunition, and anti-tank guided missiles, should be stored and supplied by the State Guard. The reason for that is so that they can inspect, properly store, and also rotate that ammunition before it's at the end of its service life. Now, some of that ammunition will still be with the militia units for quick use at their caches, with their vehicles, and so forth. The rest of it could be stored at a county arsenal for the same reasons the State Guard would have it, for proper storage, for inspection and rotation. That county arsenal would be run by a county sheriff, the county sheriff's department. Ammunition that is nearing the end of its service life would be rotated, and by that I mean it would be used for training. Now, the county arsenal, as I said, it would be run by the sheriff's department. They would need some type of access roster to know who can come in and draw that large caliber ammunition and possibly the weapon systems if it's a county militia and not an individual unit. Because they want to make sure that this stuff doesn't end up in the hands of the wrong people. And by wrong people, I mean a person who's intending it just to settle a grudge. You know, they're going to go get some artillery shells and use it to blow up their ex-wife's house, or use it to rob a bank. There should be points of contact with that sheriff's department and the militia unit leadership so they can verify when someone shows up that yes, this person is authorized to draw it. They were told to go get X amount of stuff. And there should be monthly or meetings every other month between the militias and the sheriff's department, at least the militias that have a stake in that county arsenal that need some of that ammunition, because they need to coordinate with that arsenal when they're going to do training. That arsenal is going to need to know, hey, you know, they're going to need another 500 rounds of 105 millimeter because they're going to do gunnery training, or they need a few more TOW missiles because they're going to be doing anti-armor training. The militia is meant to be a quick reactionary force, primarily a light guerrilla force. The State Guard should let the population know, let the militias know what they can support, what type of ammunition they have at their level in the state arsenals. You know, they have 105 millimeter artillery ammunition, they don't have 122 millimeter. They have 107 millimeter rockets, they don't have 122 millimeter. So that the militia unit can adjust accordingly. Now, any equipment that cannot be supported because it's outdated or just too worn out that the militia has, and I'm talking here the heavy weapons and the vehicles, there should be some type of program set up with the State Guard for a one-for-one exchange. So for every artillery piece that's wore out that can no longer be maintained, the State Guard will exchange it for one that they have depoted that is available to the militia. It should be done at no cost to the unit. You know, they shouldn't say that, hey, the county militia has to pay $10,000 in order to get this artillery piece, or they need to pay $50,000 before we'll release this tank to them. It should be done at no cost. Now, the State Guard, they would be similar capabilities as what they would have now. They would have their mechanized units, their armored units, motorized units, air assault units. They would have their, you know, fighter interceptors and so forth. And they would be controlled by the state. It would be the state governors, the state legislatures that would have control of the State Guard. So they cannot be sent overseas. They are only for defense of the homeland. Now, the State Guard should be The states should be divided up into like a military region, and it should be along state lines. Say you have like 4 or 5 states in one particular area, they're designated one region. And I'll explain more on that later and why that would come up, why it would be important. But those regions probably should be similar to the reserve regions that are out there right now. But inside that region, those states would do their rotations on the border. So you may have only one state or 2 of those states that's on the border, while the other states that are in that region, they would send units, up along that border to rotate for border defense and also for training during that time, that 1 month a year. At the state guard level, there should be meetings 2, maybe 4 times a year between the state guard, the sheriff's departments that are in charge of the county arsenals, and also militia commanders that choose to show up, so that they can coordinate training, coordinate, battle plan. What would happen if an invasion happens? How would we respond to it, type things. And in order to develop an esprit de corps and interoperability between the militia and the state guard, there could be, say, yearly competitions and training events between the state guard and the militia, and especially for that would be the heavy weapons units, because they may not have a gunnery range near where they are in their state. They might have to go to a state guard training range to use those weapon systems. Well, why not make it a competition once a year? Find out who's the top gun, who has the best unit in that state, in that region. Is it a state guard unit or is it a militia unit? And then you could have something up at the national level, a similar type of competition. So whoever wins that state competition goes on to a similar competition up at national to find out who's the best in the nation. And at the national level, they would also compete against some of the units from active duty that would have their own type of competition. Now, the state guard units and the active duty units, as much as possible, should use similar equipment so that it'll make it easier for stockpiling parts, fuel, and ammunition. It may not be the exact model. It could be something along the lines of, say, the active duty has M1A2 Abrams and the state guard has M1A1s. They're similar, they're not exact, but the spare parts for the most part will cross back and forth, same ammunition, same fuel. Any captured war stocks of weapons and ammunition should be either sold to the population for use by the militia or private individuals if they so choose. And barring that, it should be depoted for use by the state guards and the local militias. Now, your national level, the Department of Defense would be just that, a Department of Defense. It would be made up primarily of the Army, the Navy, the Air Force, and the Marines. The only elements that would be overseas outside of conflict would be Marines and some Special Forces teams doing defense of embassies, and also any territories that decide they still want to be associated with the United States. Places like Puerto Rico, Guam, American Samoa, and so forth. That's what I mean by territories. They would be the heavy punch, and they would also be they would have some airborne units as a quick reactionary force for deploying in the United States if an invasion occurs. They should be based near the borders, not directly on the borders, so that they can react quickly within a couple hours. This force optimally should be drawn down over time as the state guard units would step up, as they would get larger and better capabilities. But you're still going to have some active duty elements, because you're going to have those SAM sites, those anti-ballistic missile sites. You're still going to have the ICBMs and so forth. Now, how would this all work in a time of war? If the United States is invaded, where the defense regions comes into play is one particular region is invaded. All the states that are inside that region mobilize their state guard units for defense and also to counterattack till all the attacking enemy forces are eliminated or repelled. The commander of those state guard units would be selected on a rotational basis inside that military region, or defensive region, I should say. Active duty units that are assigned to assist that region that was attacked, they would immediately mobilize and deploy. The other active duty units that are not assigned to assist that region, they would mobilize and deploy as needed by determination from the Department of Defense, from the national level. Militias, they would choose to mobilize when they decide to. Some may wait until they're overrun by the attacking force and then mobilize and attack the enemy's rear areas, the light guerrilla force. Or they may mobilize right away and decide to assist State Guard and active duty units as they're able to, according to their capabilities. One thing I have down here is no nuclear weapons should be used on U.S. soil unless we are attacked with nukes on a first strike. We're attacked first, then we could retaliate, but really they should not be used on U.S. soil. Now, should any type of retaliation be required overseas, it should only be done by active duty units, and it would require authorization from Congress, which is law. The only exception really to the rule on requiring authorization from Congress first would be defense of an embassy or a territory. Then the local commander would follow the orders he was already given as to what to do in that situation. Any increases in the active force level would have to be done by an act of Congress, and once the situation is done, the conflict is over, those levels would be drawn back down to what they were pre-conflict. The weapons and supplies for those troops that are called up or brought into the force at that time, they would draw what they need primarily from the war reserves, from those depots, from those arsenals, until the stuff is expended, and then new items would be purchased and brought online to equip those units. Now, I have a feeling this is probably the most controversial video I'll have, but I'd like to hear other people's comments on this. What do you think? You know, is this a viable idea? You know, how would you change it, you know, if you were the one in charge deciding this stuff? How would you like to see it, and what's your reasons for it? Now, for all my engineer brothers in the Patriot and militia movements, always remember, Essayons.